Blake Sterling had it all: money, status, confidence. At 31, he was the founder of a fast-growing tech company and lived like he ran the world. Private jets, luxury apartments, designer watches. But none of that mattered tonight. It all started at a quiet leadership retreat, hosted by Jack Donovan, Blake's longtime friend and mentor. In a cozy wooden lodge nestled in the hills, Jack gathered a few hand-picked guests for a weekend, meant to humble the ego. Blake came for the drinks. That's where he met Riley. She wasn't dressed like the others. No heels, no polished suit, just an oversized hoodie, scuffed sneakers, and messy hair pulled into a half-hearted bun. She looked like she hadn't planned on being seen. "You're not one of the startup people, are you?" Blake asked, confused. "Nope," she said flatly. "I'm helping Jack with the retreat. Name tags, schedules, coffee, nothing important." Her tone was dry, unimpressed. And Blake, who was used to turning heads, found her indifference strangely interesting. Later that night, after a few glasses of wine and too many egos in one room, Jack made a bold announcement. "You want to prove you can lead real people, Blake?" he said, raising a glass. "Then live like one. Minimum wage. No fancy cars, no private chefs, and better yet, let someone else run your life for 6 months." Everyone laughed, until Jack pointed across the room, at Riley. "She'll be the one in charge. You report to her. 6 months. If you make it, you get your CEO job back, with full control. If not, we'll find someone else to lead the company." Riley's eyes widened. "You're joking." But Blake, with his usual cocky smile, turned to her and said, "You're my boss now? Fine, I'll play your game." He didn't realize it yet, but he'd just agreed to the one bet that might actually break him. Blake moved into his temporary apartment above a laundromat, a far cry from his high-rise condo. No valet, no smart fridge, no custom espresso machine. Just a flickering hallway light and a neighbor who blasted reggaeton at all hours. He showed up to his first day at Riley's nonprofit in an overpriced, tailored suit and leather loafers. The office was a modest space with squeaky chairs, uneven blinds, and a microwave that made unsettling noises. Riley didn't even look up when he walked in. "You're late," she said, still typing. "I'm 3 minutes early." "You're late for someone trying to prove something." He didn't respond. Her tone wasn't cruel, just sharp, unapologetically blunt. She wore a loose cardigan with mismatched buttons, scuffed sneakers, and a messy bun that looked accidental, but had probably been there for days. Her chipped nail polish and dark under-eye circles made her look like someone who worked too much and cared too little about how she appeared. It was jarring for Blake, who was used to power heels, slick ponytails, and curated Instagram filters. He glanced at her screen. Budgets, donation metrics, expense reports. "You handle all this yourself?" "Yep," she replied flatly, "and now you do too. You'll be learning on the job. No assistance, no shortcuts." For the next few hours, Blake was thrown into grunt work, inventory sorting, donor follow-up emails, compiling tax receipts. He spilled coffee on a box of donated gloves. Riley didn't scold him, but the way she silently handed him paper towels somehow made it worse. By the third day, Blake was aching in places he didn't know could ache from sitting in a plastic chair. Riley still hadn't acknowledged his last name once. She just called him Blake. No sarcasm, no admiration, just Blake. At the end of the week, she finally paused while he was restocking shelves. "You think this is beneath you," she said. He blinked. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." She leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "You walk in here with your rich boy watch and condescending smirk, but let me ask you something. When was the last time you did something that didn't benefit you?" He didn't have an answer. "Exactly." She walked away without waiting for a reply. For the first time in his adult life, Blake didn't feel like the one with the upper hand. Riley had no title, no power in his world, but somehow she had all the control. Not because she tried to dominate him, because she didn't need to, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Week 2 hit harder than Blake expected. The adrenaline of the bet had worn off, and now reality was setting in like a dull ache. He wasn't just struggling with the tasks Riley assigned. He was struggling with the silence between them. Each day, Riley handed him jobs that felt intentionally inconvenient. One morning, it was organizing an entire shipment of mismatched winter coats by sleeve length. Another day, she made him scrub graffiti off a brick wall with nothing but a sponge and elbow grease. No power tools, no shortcuts. When he asked why, she looked at him with that maddening calm and said, "Because not everything in life gets fixed with a button or a bonus." Blake wanted to snap back, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she said it, like she wasn't trying to humiliate him, just challenge him. He tried showing up earlier, hoping to impress her, to prove he wasn't just some spoiled CEO slumming it. But she was always already there. Same unkempt ponytail, same cracked phone screen, same oversized hoodie that looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in weeks. No makeup, chipped nail polish, coffee in a mug that said, "Sleep is for the rich." No matter what he did, it never seemed to shift her opinion, and that got under his skin more than he cared to admit. At first, he tried ignoring her, working in silence, pretending he was above it all. But as the days dragged on, he found himself watching her, not in a flirtatious way, at least not yet, but like someone watching a riddle unfold. There was something about her that didn't compute. She wasn't warm, but she wasn't cold either. She was sharp, present, and deeply committed to the cause in a way Blake couldn't fake if he tried. She didn't care about his past. She didn't seem remotely interested in his money or his old title. In fact, Blake started to suspect she looked down on those things, not out of envy, but out of conviction. That's what really stung. One Thursday evening, the office was nearly empty. The buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead hummed like static as Blake sat hunched over a donated laptop, trying to finish reorganizing the donor database. He'd added some filters to make the active contributors list look more impressive, a move he would have praised back at his old company. Optics mattered, right? Riley passed behind him, glanced at the screen, then stopped. "You're padding the list." Blake didn't even look up. "It's not padding, it's formatting." She stepped beside him. "You're using outdated contacts and inactive donors to make the numbers look bigger." He turned in his chair, defensive. "It's not inaccurate." She folded her arms. "It's misleading." Blake exhaled, leaning back. "I used to run a billion-dollar company." Riley blinked, unimpressed. "Cool. I run a food program that keeps 200 kids from going hungry every weekend. We playing ego games, or you want to actually help?" That landed, not because it was harsh, but because it was true. "I don't get you," Blake muttered, more to himself than her. "Most people would kill to have what I had. The house, the jets, the press." She didn't flinch. "Yeah, and most of those people are too busy chasing status to know what they've lost along the way." He paused. "You really hate me, don't you?" Her eyes softened, just a little. "I don't hate you," she said, "but I've been burned by people like you. You come in with your plans and projections, and when the numbers don't fit, you cut the whole thing loose. Doesn't matter who gets left behind." He didn't argue. He couldn't. She continued, her voice lower now. "I'm not here to teach you a lesson, but I'm also not going to clap for every minor effort like you're a child learning to walk." He laughed bitterly. "Feels like it." She tilted her head. "Then maybe you're not used to working for anything you didn't already own." The silence between them stretched. Riley turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "I don't need you to impress me, Blake. I need you to stop performing and start paying attention." And just like that, she was gone. Blake sat in the office long after she left, staring at the donor list, wondering how he'd gotten to this point. Not financially, he knew that story. But personally, emotionally, somewhere along the way he'd lost something. Maybe Riley wasn't trying to break him. Maybe she was just the first person who refused to pretend he was already whole. For the first time in a long time, Blake didn't feel like a boss. He felt like a student. The next morning Blake arrived early, earlier than anyone expected. The front door of the community center was still locked. He stood outside in the crisp morning air, coffee in one hand, his phone in the other, not texting, not scrolling, just thinking. It was the first time in years he wasn't on a clock. Riley showed up 10 minutes later, a grocery bag in one hand and her usual messy bun tilted lopsided. She stopped short when she saw him waiting. "You're early," she said flatly, unlocking the door. "Didn't want to miss the fun," he replied, trying to sound casual. "Besides, someone has to make sure the vending machine is stocked." She smirked. "I'm putting you on pantry duty today. Food deliveries are late. You'll need to organize what we've got and prep kits for 30 families by noon." Blake blinked. "You're serious?" "I don't joke before coffee." Inside the small supply room, Blake found towers of dented cans, overripe bananas, and boxes of dry goods stacked like a chaotic game of Tetris. No spreadsheets, no algorithm, just raw human need. He tied on a faded volunteer apron and got to work. At first it felt pointless. The system made no sense. Items were mismatched. Expired goods were mixed in with fresh ones. But the more he worked, the more his instincts kicked in. Not the CEO ones, the human ones. He started grouping things by meals instead of categories. A box for a breakfast family of 4, a box with easy dinner prep, one for a diabetic client, one for a single dad with picky kids. He didn't realize he was humming until Riley stepped in to check his progress. "I thought you'd be gone by now," she said, scanning the boxes. He shrugged. "Turns out there's something satisfying about creating order from chaos." "Good," she replied, grabbing a clipboard, "because chaos is pretty much our operating budget." Blake grinned. "Is that an official line? I could put it on a t-shirt." She rolled her eyes but didn't hide the hint of a smile. Later that day, a crisis broke out. One of the after-school volunteers didn't show up, and a dozen kids were already on their way. Riley rushed into the hallway, visibly tense. "I'll do it," Blake offered without thinking. She turned. "You sure?" "I taught myself how to code. I think I can handle a few spelling games." 10 minutes later, Blake was sitting cross-legged on the floor, a circle of energetic third graders tossing flashcards at each other and calling him Mr. B. One of the girls tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "You smell like cereal." He didn't even argue. From the hallway, Riley watched for a moment, her expression unreadable. Something in her was starting to shift, not because Blake was charming, he wasn't trying to be, but because for once, he was showing up without pretending to know everything. That evening, as they locked up, Riley handed him a small folder. "What's this?" Blake asked. "Your first grant application," she said. "You're helping me file it tomorrow. Don't screw it up." He smiled at the challenge. "No promises." Riley paused at the doorway. "Hey, don't think this means I trust you." "I wouldn't dare," he said with a wink. But as she left, a quiet warmth settled over him. The bet had thrown him into a world he didn't understand. But here, in this messy, underfunded, chaotic space, he was beginning to find something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The next morning, Blake arrived at the center, humming the same tune he'd been caught with in the pantry the day before. He was early again. 20 minutes this time. He'd even grabbed an extra coffee. "Black, no sugar, right?" he said, holding it out as Riley walked in. She hesitated just a second. "Thanks," she said cautiously, taking the cup. They worked side by side for most of the morning, filing grant paperwork, printing forms. Blake cracked a few jokes. Riley didn't laugh, but she didn't roll her eyes either. That felt like progress. Later, as they took a short break outside near the back entrance, Blake leaned against the wall beside her. For once, they weren't surrounded by chaos, just a sliver of sunlight and the distant clatter of traffic. "You ever think about how weird this is?" Blake asked. 6 months ago, I was flying private to Bali. Now I'm labeling cans of beans." "Welcome to real life," Riley said, sipping the coffee. "I don't mind it," he said honestly. "I mean, it's different. You're different." There was a beat of silence. Riley didn't respond, just kept her gaze on the street. Blake nudged her gently with his elbow. "Hey, I meant that in a good way." She looked at him, calm but firm. "Don't." He blinked. "Don't what?" "Whatever this is, don't turn a moment of work into something else." Blake straightened. "I wasn't." Yes, you were, she said, not unkindly. Look, I know yesterday felt like a breakthrough for you, and it was. You stepped up. I appreciated it. But that doesn't mean anything's changed between us. You're here to learn, not to flirt. The words landed like cold water, not cruel, just blunt. Blake's pride flinched. He gave a small scoff and stared out at the street. Right. Got it. Boss lady sets the rules. Riley stiffened but said nothing. Blake kept going quietly but pointedly. Makes sense. You've clearly got everything under control, except maybe your closet or your hair. Riley turned her head slowly, eyes sharp but controlled. She didn't rise to it. Let me know when you're done feeling embarrassed, she said flatly. There's a volunteer orientation in 10 minutes. You're leading it. Then she walked back inside. Blake remained outside a moment longer, jaw tight. The worst part wasn't her shutting him down. It was that she'd done it without emotion, without trying to win, as if she'd already expected him to mess up. Inside, Riley passed the break room and took a deep breath. She wasn't angry, just disappointed. Not in him, in herself, for even thinking, for a second, that he might be different. The morning after their awkward exchange, Blake arrived quietly, not early this time, but not late either. He looked like a man trying not to draw attention, his confidence tucked behind a pair of sunglasses and an over-poured thermos of gas station coffee. Riley handed him the grant folder with a clipped, "We leave in 10. No sarcasm, no warmth, just business." They were headed to a local park to help with a weekend outreach fair, organized by 3 nonprofits and held together with duct tape and sheer willpower. Blake had never seen a more disorganized operation in his life. Folding tables wobbled, signs were handwritten in Sharpie, and half the volunteers didn't show up. Riley, in her usual stained t-shirt and hair half-pinned, took control without blinking. Blake hovered near a stack of hygiene kits, unsure of where to jump in. A woman nearby was arguing about allergy-safe snacks. A teenager knocked over a crate of shampoo. A dog barked non-stop next to the children's tent. "Welcome to the glamour of poverty work," Riley muttered as she passed, balancing 3 clipboards and a bag of diapers. He couldn't help but grin. A few hours later, the sun had baked through his shirt, his shoes were muddy, and his arms ached from carrying crates. He leaned against a shade tent, finally stealing a second of peace. Riley approached with 2 small cups of warm lemonade. "You look like you just survived a hurricane," she said. He took the cup. "That's funny. You look like you started one." For a second she smiled, really smiled, and it caught him off guard. The tension between them shifted just enough to feel normal, not flirtatious, not icy, just 2 people who were starting to understand each other. "So," he said cautiously, "how'd you end up in charge of all this chaos?" She raised an eyebrow. "Why, looking to climb the nonprofit ladder?" He chuckled. "I don't know. You're surprisingly good at it. It's not just logistics. It's like you're reading the room every second." Riley looked out across the park. "You'd be surprised what you learn when no one's trying to impress you." There was something in her tone, guarded, but with depth. Blake sensed a history she wasn't ready to share, so he didn't push. Instead, he gestured toward a kid chasing a soap bubble with pure delight. "See that?" he said. "That's the first smile I've earned all day." Riley followed his gaze. "That's Jackson. His mom's in recovery. This is their first time at one of these." "Really?" "Yeah. She didn't want to come, said it'd make her feel weak. I told her showing up was the strongest thing she could do." Blake looked at her, moved by something he couldn't name. "You say things like that a lot?" "Only when I think no one's listening." A pause settled between them, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken things. For the first time, Blake didn't feel like a project or a punching bag. He felt useful. And she didn't look like a handler. She looked like someone who had weathered storms long before he showed up. As they cleaned up, Blake took initiative. He didn't need instructions. He just worked. Packed boxes, thanked families, tossed trash bags. Riley noticed, but said nothing. Only when they reached the van did she hand him a folded paper. "What's this?" he asked. "Our second grant proposal, due next week. You're helping." He tucked it in his bag. This becoming a habit? Don't flatter yourself, she said. You're still unpaid labor. She started to walk away, but paused. You did all right today, Blake. That was all she said, but he smiled the whole way home. The following week brought a heat wave, and with it, Blake's most humiliating challenge yet, a temp shift at Burger Barn, a local fast food joint Riley had prearranged as part of the reality immersion experience, as she put it. He showed up in pressed khakis and a dry-cleaned polo, which earned him a grunt from the teenage manager and a glare from the fry cook. His name tag read Blake, misspelled with a Y. Riley, of course, didn't correct it. Blake tried to keep his cool. The headset kept crackling, the grease smell was suffocating. His first customer asked for a chicken burger, no chicken. The second spilled a large soda across the counter and didn't apologize. Riley sat in the back booth, laptop open, watching silently. After an hour, Blake's white polo had turned translucent with sweat. His hair clung to his forehead. A small child pointed at him and whispered, "Mommy, he looks sick." By lunch rush, the real breakdown began. A drive-through order was wrong. A customer screamed. Blake's hands shook as he tried to restock sauces, ketchup splattering across his sleeve. The teenage manager barked at him for being too slow. A co-worker smirked and muttered, "Guess money can't buy hustle." And then it happened. A tray full of food slipped from Blake's hands mid-shift. Burgers, fries, and 3 chocolate shakes crashing to the floor. The restaurant went silent for a split second. All eyes turned to him. He stood there frozen, drenched in sweat, fries stuck to his shoe. Riley approached slowly, a rag in one hand. "You okay?" she asked, voice low. Blake didn't answer. His throat burned. He knelt down to clean the mess, but his hands were shaking too badly to hold the napkins. For the first time since the challenge began, he looked broken. Riley crouched beside him, helping mop up the spill. She didn't gloat, didn't lecture, just worked. "I'm not cut out for this," Blake muttered under his breath. Riley glanced at him, then back to the floor. "Neither are most people, but they do it anyway." The moment lingered. The humiliation was real, but so was the empathy. Later, in the alley behind the restaurant, Blake sat on a crate, head in his hands. Riley leaned against the wall nearby, sipping water. "I had a panic attack once," she said suddenly, "during my first job at a call center. Thought the headset cord was choking me. I quit after 2 weeks. Blake looked up, surprised. "You?" "Yeah, me. I threw up in the break room and left through the fire exit." He chuckled, despite himself. "I guess we're both terrible employees," he said. "No," she replied, her tone softer now. "We're just human." For the first time, Blake didn't try to fix the moment. He just sat in it, and for the first time, Riley didn't walk away. The next day was unusually quiet at the community center. No shifts, no crises. Riley had given Blake a stack of files to digitize in the back office, a cramped, dusty storage room converted into a workspace with barely functioning Wi-Fi and a humming box fan in the corner. Blake didn't mind. After the Burger Barn disaster, anything without grease and screaming customers felt like a vacation. He worked through the pile quickly, entering donor names, grant numbers, and old email chains. At one point, Riley came by with a sandwich and a sarcastic, "Don't say I never feed you." He grinned. "What? No truffle oil?" She rolled her eyes. "You're lucky I remembered the mustard." They shared a chuckle, and once again the space between them didn't feel so wide. But that moment didn't last. Later, while sorting papers, Blake noticed a photo tucked between 2 folders. He pulled it out instinctively, an old printed snapshot from years ago. It was Riley, except not the Riley he knew. She was standing on a stage at what looked like a fundraising gala, hair curled and glossy, wearing a sleek black dress and heels, posture straight, smile confident. Beside her stood a man in a tuxedo holding a donation check. The whole scene looked like it belonged in a non-profit newsletter. Blake blinked. "Is this you?" Riley looked up from her desk just outside the room, eyes narrowing. He held up the photo, I almost didn't recognize you." There was no malice in his voice, just honest surprise. But the second the words left his mouth, the air shifted. Riley got up slowly and walked over, taking the photo from his hand without a word. "I didn't mean it like that," Blake said, sensing the change. "It's just different from how you dress now." Her fingers tightened on the photo. "Yeah, well, dry cleaning and blowouts don't exactly fit the budget these days." "I wasn't judging," he said quickly. "You looked really confident, polished." "And now I don't?" she asked flatly. Blake hesitated. "That's not what I—" Riley set the photo down on the desk between them. "You know what the funny thing is? That night I felt like a fraud. Whole thing was smoke and mirrors. I was running on fumes, fundraising to keep the lights on, smiling for donors who'd never stepped foot in the neighborhoods we served." Blake was quiet. Riley crossed her arms. "But people like you saw the dress, the hair, the speech. That was the version you'd return a call from. This one?" She gestured to herself. Baggy cardigan, ink on her fingers, chipped nail polish. "This version answers phones, files grants, disappears." "That's not fair," Blake said. "You're not invisible." She scoffed. "I am to men like you, unless I'm in a dress and pretending I don't know more than you do." He opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off. "You looked at that photo like it was proof I used to be better. You think this version of me is a downgrade, don't you?" "No, Riley," he said, his voice quiet. "I think this version is real, but I just didn't know." She stared at him for a long moment. "That's the problem. You never did." The silence that followed wasn't like the others they'd shared. It wasn't tense with flirtation or softened by sarcasm. It was cold, final. Riley picked up the photo and walked back to her desk. Blake sat there, feeling like the room had shrunk around him. For the first time, he realized he hadn't just misstepped. He had struck something buried deep. And it wasn't just about a photo. It was about how she had been seen. Or rather, how she hadn't. Riley barely spoke to Blake for the next 2 days. Not because she was angry, at least not entirely. It was colder than that. She kept things strictly professional. No eye contact, no banter, no softness, just task lists and clipped instructions. Blake felt the shift instantly, like being shoved back behind glass. And he didn't argue, not this time. Instead, he just kept showing up. Carried donation boxes, took inventory, mopped floors, cleaned out a moldy mini fridge without complaint. Still, nothing moved the needle. It was Thursday morning when Blake arrived early again, earlier than usual. The community center was silent, dim. He brewed 2 cups of coffee out of habit, one black, one with oat milk. He left them on the table and sat in the quiet, just listening to the hum of the old ceiling fan. That's when he noticed Riley's laptop sitting on the corner desk. The screen blinked weakly with a warning, battery critically low. He paused. That same laptop had crashed 3 times this week. Riley had cursed at it under her breath like it was a coworker who couldn't pull their weight. She once muttered, "If this thing dies before the grant deadline, I'm legally allowed to scream into a pillow for 6 hours." Blake walked over. The lid creaked open. The fan wheezed, screen flickering for a moment, and then black. Dead. He hesitated, then quietly opened the drawer where he remembered seeing a small screwdriver. Within minutes, he had the machine on a table, tools out. Carefully, he pried open the back, replaced the dead battery, resoldered a frayed connection on the charging port, cleaned the dust from the fan. He worked slowly, methodically. He'd actually picked up the replacement parts the day before from a repair shop in Queens. He didn't even know why at the time, just that he wanted to be useful. Now he was. After the repairs, he backed up all of Riley's grant files onto a fresh flash drive he had tucked in his coat pocket. He didn't open anything. He just saved the data, then closed the laptop and left it on the desk, good as new. By the time Riley arrived, the office was brighter, humming with quiet activity. She stepped in, clearly tired, holding a half-eaten protein bar in one hand. Her eyes landed on her laptop. "Did you touch my computer?" she asked, voice sharp. Blake turned from the supply closet and nodded. "Yeah. It was about to die permanently. I replaced the battery, cleaned the fan. You've been fighting it all week. Riley raised an eyebrow. You did that just now? Blake shrugged. This morning, you almost lost everything. I didn't want that to happen. She stepped closer and cautiously opened the laptop. It booted instantly. No flicker, no fan noise. She stared at it. How do I know you didn't mess something up? She asked, tone flat. You don't, Blake admitted. But I didn't. Riley narrowed her eyes. You didn't ask me. No, he said. I didn't think I needed permission to fix something that was already breaking. Riley folded her arms. You could have made it worse. I could have, Blake agreed. But I didn't. I backed up all your files too. Didn't read anything. Just protected it. There was a long pause. Then, more quietly, she asked, You bought parts ahead of time? Blake nodded. Yesterday. Saw how it was glitching. Figured it might crash soon. She looked at him like she was trying to see through him. You didn't have to do that, Riley said, voice low. I know, Blake replied, but I wanted to. She ran a hand over the top of the laptop, then slowly closed it again. You could have broken it. You didn't. I know, he repeated, then added, This place kind of depends on you. So I thought, maybe someone should make sure your tools work. That stopped her. For a few seconds, Riley didn't respond. Then finally, she looked up. You really didn't read anything? She asked. Not a word, Blake said. She studied him, skeptical, but something in her expression softened. Still, she murmured, it's not nothing. He smiled gently and said, Well, I'll be in the pantry if you want to throw me at expired tomato sauce again. She actually smirked. Chaos is still our entire operating budget. I told you, Blake replied. T-shirts. As he turned toward the door, Riley called out, Hey! He stopped and looked over his shoulder. Thanks, she said. He nodded. Any time. They shared a brief smile, and once again, the space between them didn't feel so wide. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of trust. The next few days passed in a blur of normalcy, at least on the surface. Blake continued helping around the center, stocking supplies, organizing schedules, fixing whatever was broken. He no longer asked for praise, he just showed up. Sometimes Riley caught herself watching him longer than she meant to. Once she caught herself smiling, and she hated that. One evening, after most volunteers had left, Riley lingered alone in the main office, sorting through a stack of donation receipts. Blake, returning from locking up the back entrance, poked his head in. Need a hand? I'm fine, she replied, not looking up. He hesitated. I said I'm fine, she snapped, sharper than she intended. The silence afterward was thick. She sighed and rubbed her forehead. Sorry, she muttered. Long day. Blake stepped inside quietly and leaned against the wall. Yeah, I get it. She paused, fingers tracing the edge of a folder. Do you? There was no edge in her voice this time, just something softer, tired, torn. Blake didn't answer right away. I know I've said a lot of stupid things, done worse, but I'm trying, Riley. I'm not that guy anymore. Riley sat back, arms crossed. You ever try to forgive someone and then remember why you were angry in the first place? He blinked. I mean, yeah, sure. She looked at him. Even when they're not awful anymore? I guess that's the hardest part, he said carefully, when the anger doesn't match the present, but still won't go away. Another pause. That nonprofit I used to run, she said suddenly, voice quieter. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, about who I was back then. Blake tilted his head. You used to run a nonprofit? She nodded. It was small, just literacy workshops, mostly for girls who'd slipped through the cracks. We didn't have a big budget or fancy metrics, but it mattered, at least to me. Her hands trembled slightly as she stacked the papers. One day, we lost all our funding. Just gone. Said we weren't scalable, that we didn't meet some new benchmark. Blake's expression shifted, confused at first, then uneasy. "I remember that policy," he said slowly. "It was supposed to help streamline grants, but—" He trailed off. "Yeah," Riley said, meeting his eyes. "That was your name at the bottom of it. Virtuo Capital. I remember the email. Cold, corporate. It didn't even say my name." Blake sank into the chair across from her, stunned. I didn't know you weren't supposed to," she said. "That's the point, Blake. You made decisions from a boardroom, and I was just collateral. One of hundreds, maybe thousands. You don't even remember the wreckage." The pain in her voice wasn't rage. It was something quieter, older, a weight she'd carried alone for years. "I was 26, she continued. "We closed the doors a month later. I packed everything myself, cried in the supply closet because it was the only place no one could hear me." Blake stared at her, eyes wide. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I know," she said. "But that doesn't change what happened." She stood, suddenly needing distance. "I used to admire you," she said at the doorway, "before I understood what your kind of ambition costs." And then she was gone, leaving Blake in the dim office, surrounded by numbers, receipts, and the silence of a truth he never meant to create. Blake couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, and the city outside his window buzzed faintly with sirens and late-night traffic. But inside, everything was still, except his thoughts. He kept hearing her voice. "You used to inspire me, before I realized who you really were." He sat up, restless, and turned on his laptop. For hours he scrolled through old company files, budgets, memos, policy changes, quarterly reports, looking for anything related to Riley's nonprofit. It had taken him a while to even remember the name, and then he found it. A small grant entry, buried in a funding report. No red flags, no explanation. Just a single sentence. Program terminated. Effective immediately. Low strategic impact. The line made his chest tighten. It wasn't even a decision he remembered making. It had probably passed over his desk for a signature. One signature. And someone's entire mission was erased. Someone like Riley. He closed the laptop and sat in silence, face in his hands. The next morning, he arrived at the center earlier than usual. Riley was already at her desk, typing with headphones on. When he walked in, she didn't look up. "Morning," he offered, trying to sound normal. She just nodded, eyes still on the screen. He lingered near the counter, pretending to look through the mail. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Riley, can we talk?" "We're late for the library run," she said, standing and grabbing a box of books. "Grab the cart." The conversation died before it began. They walked in silence. The hallways buzzed with volunteers and kids running between rooms, but between them, it was quiet, tense. Riley didn't offer small talk. She kept walking ahead, turning corners quickly as if staying just out of emotional reach. At the elevator, Blake finally spoke. "I found it," he said quietly. "Last night, the grant file, your program." Riley froze, her finger hovering over the elevator button. Slowly, she turned toward him. "I didn't remember," he said, "but it was there. Just a few words, no warning, no follow-up." "And that's the problem," she said, her voice cold but controlled. "It didn't even register. To you it was nothing, but for me it was everything." They stood in the hallway, elevator forgotten. "You want to feel better, Blake?" she asked. "You want a redemption arc? Great, but don't come to me now like you've had some big awakening because you saw a spreadsheet." He looked at her, stunned by the rawness in her voice. "I worked for 3 years on that program," she said. "We helped over 500 kids learn to read. Some of those kids didn't even have books at home. And then one day, the funding vanished. I called your office. I emailed. I begged for a meeting. No one replied." Blake swallowed hard. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear." "That's the worst part," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "You didn't know. You didn't care. You were too high up to see who got crushed underneath your climb." She turned and started walking again. Blake followed, but slower now, each step heavier than the last. Later that afternoon, After a quiet day of meetings and routine work, he found her in the supply room. She was labeling snack bins for the after-school program, her hair pulled back messily, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired. "Riley," he said quietly. She didn't stop working. "I'm not here to defend myself," he said. "I just want to say I was wrong, and I'm starting to see that now. All of it." She finally paused, the marker frozen in her hand. "Words are easy, Blake," she said without turning. "You built an empire out of them." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. I just wanted you to know that I see you now, not just as some challenge to win, not as someone assigned to punish me, but as the person I failed before I even met her." There was a long silence between them. Then she said softly, "I believed in people like you once." He nodded. "I want to believe in myself again too. But first, I need to start undoing some of what I broke." She didn't say anything more, but she also didn't ask him to leave. That small silence, that choice not to push him away, was enough to make him hope. The next morning, Blake didn't go to the office. Instead, he showed up early to the center, long before Riley or the first volunteer arrived. He sat outside on the steps, coffee in hand, watching the sun climb slowly over the quiet street. For the first time in weeks, his mind wasn't buzzing with what to say or do. It was just still. When Riley arrived, she looked surprised to see him. A nod was exchanged, nothing more. But she didn't seem annoyed by his presence. They worked separately all morning. Blake restocked shelves. Riley typed in her office. The tension from the night before wasn't gone, but it had changed shape. Around midday, when the center was briefly empty, Blake knocked on her door. "Got a minute?" he asked. Riley looked up. "Sure." He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "I wanted to talk," he said, "about last night, about everything." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, but not cold, just cautious. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Blake began, voice low, "and not about quarterly goals or media spin. About me, the real me." She said nothing, but didn't look away. "I came into this bet thinking it was just a stunt," he continued. "A game I'd win with some minor discomfort and a story to tell. But you, this place, you've completely flipped that. Being around you, seeing how you lead, how you show up without pretense. It's made me realize how much of my life has been noise, how little I actually knew about anything that mattered." He paused, hands open by his sides. "I want to be better, Riley, not just because I screwed things up or because I feel guilty, but because for the first time, I actually want to earn something real." Her posture softened slightly. "I was so sure of myself before this," he said. "Now I see how small I was, how afraid I was of feeling anything real. But then I met you, and every rule I built started to fall apart." Still, she didn't speak. "I don't expect that to fix anything," Blake added quickly. "But I needed to say it. You've changed me, whether you meant to or not." She stood slowly, her voice even. "You know what makes this hard?" He shook his head. "I used to look up to you. We used your story to inspire my team. You were proof that someone from nowhere could build something real." Blake looked down, ashamed. "And then we got the termination letter. Your signature at the bottom. I didn't want to believe it was you, but it was." She took a breath, then added, "You remind me of someone else, too." Blake glanced up. "My ex. Same charm, same power. He made promises, big ones, and every time I got close, he moved the finish line. Said he'd change, never did." Blake's chest tightened. "I didn't want to be wrong again," she said. "You're not," he said quietly. "You were right to be cautious, but I'm not him." "No, but you were." He stepped forward, not too close. "I know I was. I've spent most of my life thinking control meant strength, that people like me got to write the rules. But now, I want to unlearn that." Riley watched him closely, unsure if she wanted to believe him. "I don't expect a clean slate," Blake said, "but I want to be different, not just say it, live it. And if you let me, I'll prove it." There was silence. Then she walked toward him and kissed him. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was hesitant, fragile, but it was real. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. "I'm still scared," she admitted. Blake wrapped his arms around her, gentle. "Then I'll be patient, just don't walk away yet." Riley stepped back, nodding. "Prove it," she whispered. "I will." And for the first time, she didn't seem ready to doubt him. Exactly 1 week remained. Blake marked the date on his phone without really thinking about it, until Riley brought it up. "So," she said one morning, sipping her coffee, "7 days to go. You've made it further than I thought." Blake raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment?" Riley kept her voice neutral. "Just an observation, but I've been thinking about how this ends." He set his mug down. "And?" She leaned against the counter, her eyes steady. "There's one last thing I want you to do." Blake waited. "I need you to help me manage a community board grant. We're reviewing proposals for which neighborhood programs get funded next quarter. The board meets tomorrow." He looked skeptical. "And you want me to pitch one?" Riley stepped forward and handed him a thick folder. "No, I want you to decide." Blake opened it. Inside were 7 small nonprofit proposals: youth programs, health clinics, job training efforts. Riley added, "They all deserve something, but only one will get the full funding." Blake glanced up. "And you're trusting me with this?" Riley shook her head slightly. "I'm testing you." Blake stared down at the paperwork. Unease crept in. He knew this game too well. Prioritize efficiency, cut what doesn't scale, maximize ROI. But that version of him had cost too many people too much. He asked quietly, "What's the catch?" Riley said, "You'll sit at the table with the board. They'll listen to you, and I won't say a word. This time you hold the cards." Blake exhaled. "What if I screw it up?" Riley replied, "If that happens, I guess both of us will find out the truth." The next day, Blake wore the same shirt he'd worn to Burger Barn. Not intentionally, he just hadn't done laundry. Still, it felt symbolic. The meeting was held in a borrowed classroom with flickering lights and mismatched chairs. 5 board members sat around the table: a retired teacher, a local grocer, a young mother, an overworked nurse, and a pastor who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Riley sat silently at the end. Blake flipped through the proposals. Each one asked for less than he used to spend on a single dinner. Old instincts twitched. He wanted to default to metrics and charts. But then he remembered the stories Riley had shared. The kids, the parents, the people. When his turn came, he set the paperwork aside. "I met a kid from one of these programs," Blake said. "She's 7. Thought I was a magician because I could read the word elephant." A soft laugh passed through the room. "She's not failing because she's lazy," he said. "She's failing because her school has one working computer. Her parents don't speak English. They just want her to have a chance." Silence followed, but not the awkward kind, the meaningful kind. In the end, Blake voted for the smallest program. It didn't have the strongest numbers, but it served the most invisible families. After the meeting, the board members left, thanking him on the way out. Riley stayed behind. She said softly, "You surprised me." Blake smiled. "Yeah? I thought you'd play it safe, or strategic." He shrugged. "I used to think strategy meant power. Now I think it means knowing who you're hurting." They stood quietly. Riley reached into her bag and pulled out the original contract, the one Jack had written as a joke-turned-wager. She tore it in half, then again, then dropped it in the trash. "No more contracts," she said. "If we move forward, it's because we both choose to." Blake looked at her, stunned. "So this was the final exam?" Riley nodded. "No. This was the answer key." He let out a breath, stepping just a little closer. "Then I hope I passed." "You did," she said. "But it doesn't mean there won't be retests." Blake grinned. "I'm okay with that." They didn't kiss, not this time. But as they left the room, they walked side by side. And this time, they didn't walk apart. The morning after the board meeting, Blake and Riley stood side by side on the community center's cracked front steps, sipping coffee in silence. It was the kind of silence that didn't need breaking. until a familiar voice called out from across the lot. "There you are. I've been looking for you two." Blake turned. Jack stood near the curb, his signature smirk in place, sunglasses tucked into the collar of his t-shirt. Jack wasn't just an old friend. He was the one who had started this whole thing. The bet, the challenge, the mentor who'd watched Blake rise and fall in equal measure. He held out a sealed envelope. "What's this?" Blake asked, wary. "Your second chance," Jack replied, straight from the board. Blake tore open the envelope. Inside, a reinstatement letter. CEO of Marshall Ventures. Effective immediately. "You're serious?" Blake looked up, scanning Jack's face for a joke. "As a heart attack," Jack said. "You've changed. People noticed. Hell, I noticed. And it's yours if you want it." Blake's eyes flicked to Riley. Her expression didn't change, but her hand tightened around her coffee cup. "I need to think about it," Blake said slowly. Jack nodded, not pushing. "Of course, just don't think too long." He left with a clap on Blake's shoulder. Later that afternoon, Blake accepted. Riley didn't say much. She congratulated him. She smiled. But something had shifted in her eyes, and over the next few days the shift grew. Blake had less time. Meetings started early and ran long. He moved back into his old apartment in Midtown, sleek, glassy, and cold. Riley didn't say anything, but she noticed how quickly he slipped back into his tailored shirts and high-speed cadence. And at night, when they did see each other, his mind often seemed elsewhere. One evening, a week into his new role, they met at his place. The view was ridiculous, skyscrapers glittering like diamonds, but Riley didn't care about the skyline. She cared about the distance in his eyes. "You okay?" she asked as he poured them wine. "Yeah," he said, handing her a glass. "Just tired. Lot going on." She nodded, unsure. The air between them was thick with something unsaid. Riley sat down on the couch, folding her legs under her. "You're slipping back into it." Blake looked over. "Into what?" "The world you used to live in, the one where everything was fast and shallow and nothing real had time to breathe." He sat beside her, silent for a long moment. And then, with a sigh, he stood up and walked into the next room. He returned with a folder, thick, unmarked, filled with handwritten notes and printouts. "I haven't been distant because I'm going backwards," he said, setting the folder in her lap. "I've been distant because I'm trying to go forward." Riley opened it. Inside were 7 cover pages, each of the non-profit proposals from the board meeting, the ones that didn't get funding. "I've been spending the last week finding donors," Blake said. "Silent ones. People I used to pitch billion-dollar ideas to. This time I'm pitching food banks, after-school tutoring, ESL workshops." Riley's breath caught. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Because I didn't want credit. I just wanted to know I could do something right." Tears welled in her eyes, unexpected, unwelcome, but real. "You remembered them all," she said, flipping through the pages. "Everyone," he replied softly. "You said only one could win, but I couldn't forget the rest." She looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time since Jack handed him that envelope, her guard dropped. "I was scared," she admitted, "that if you went back I'd lose you, that this whole thing would reset and I'd just be another page in a story you outgrew." "You're not a page, Riley," Blake said. "You're the part I never want to rewrite." She set the folder down. "You're different." "I'm still becoming," he replied, "but I'm not doing it without you." A pause. Then, "You still owe me laundry duty," she said, wiping a tear and laughing. He smiled. "I'll bring the quarters." And for the first time in that big, glossy apartment filled with noise and silence, they weren't afraid of the future. They were building it. Together. The bet was never really about money. It was about who Blake used to be and who he chose to become. And for Riley, it was never about revenge. It was about seeing if change was possible, if someone who once lived above the world could learn to walk beside it, beside her. In the end, they both got more than they bargained for. Not a trophy, not a win, but a partner. And maybe a second chance at the kind of love that doesn't need to be proven, just lived. What about you? Would you have given Blake a chance? Could you forgive someone who once shattered your world if they rebuilt themselves from the inside out? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more narratives that remind us all that the hardest hearts can change. And sometimes, the best transformations start with a dare. Thanks for watching.